What's going on, guys? This is Gainz Gaming. Today we just got the new Alexander the Great museum buff in game. So we're going to be taking a look at the museum buffs and telling you guys whether or not these museum buffs are good enough to use these commanders in the open field. So if we go over to our museum over here, we can scroll all the way to the end, and this is where you are going to find Constantine and Alexander the Great finally in the museum. So with Constantine, we can see that infantry attack is going to be increased by 20%, and normal attack damage is going to increase by 5%. For Alexander the Great, we're seeing a 10% increase in infantry defense and normal attack and damage reduction of 3%. And as a bonus, we also have Pyrus here as well, 15% infantry defense and 5% skill damage. So the big question is, are these buffs good enough to make these commanders useful in Season of Conquest? And I think it's a tough thing to consider because these commanders are just on the verge of usable in Season of Conquest depending on where you are in the game. So for me, I used Alexander the Great up until this last KVK when I started using Pakal instead, but Alexander the Great getting 10% infantry defense and 3% normal attack reduction isn't all that great. However, if you are using Alexander the Great, this is pretty awesome because you're getting that extra bonus. But if you are not using Alexander the Great, I would not recommend you go out of your way to use Alexander the Great due to this museum buff. It is not like a museum buff such as Mehmed, where it completely transformed the usability of the commander. Because with Mehmed, you have an additional 30% troop health and 10% skill damage. And Mehmed went from a commander that was basically unusable in Season of Conquest to a commander that you should almost always be using in Season of Conquest, similar to Minamoto. Minamoto gained 30% cavalry defense and 30% cavalry attack, which is absolutely insane. Then you also have like YSG, 20% increased archer defense and 5% skill damage. These are all commanders that dramatically increase their usability in Season of Conquest. However, when we take a look at these new commanders entering the museum, Constantine definitely needed a museum buff. And if you are using him in your Sunset Canyon, which I would highly recommend, you should definitely be picking this up because you are going to be able to elevate your Sunset Canyon. But however, if you are using him from the open field, I would not recommend using him in 2023. He is just not good enough in 2023 to be usable in the open field. Now, when it comes to Alexander the Great is still usable in Season of Conquest in the open field. I have had really good trades using Alexander the Great. He doesn't give you a ton of kills. There are obviously a lot of better options, but for a lot of people that have Alexander the Great finished already, he is a really good commander that you can still use in Season of Conquest, and this is going to give you that extra bonus that he really needs in the open field. However, I don't think that this bonus makes him a good enough commander to warrant not investing into the most meta infantry. And what I mean by that is commanders such as Scipio Prime, such as Herald, such as Tariq or Sargon. These are all commanders that are much better than Alexander the Great, even with the museum buff. Like I said before, when you look at commanders such as like Mehmed, he completely took a 180 on his usability versus Alexander the Great isn't really all that much better. You know, he is getting some extra defense, but he already has a good amount of defense on his kit from this 30% defense bonus. And, you know, the normal attack reduction is also decent because you're going to take less normal attack damage and counterattack damage. However, I just don't think that these museum buffs are good enough to elevate these commanders, Alexander the Great and Constantine, to be usable in the open field. If you are in KVK 2, however, they are still decent commanders, but in KVK 2, you're also not going to have the museum. So there's that kind of pro and con of these two commanders, where they are usable in KVK 2 and actually pretty good, but once you get to Season of Conquest, even with the museum buffs, they are just not good enough to get you by in the open field. Now the question is, should you be investing into these commanders right now if you are not in Season of Conquest? And in my opinion, the answer is no. You should not be investing into these commanders with your gold heads or really even all that many gems if you are trying to be better in Season of Conquest. If you are planning on migrating back to KVK 2 over and over again, completely different answer. And in that way, I would recommend investing into Alexander the Great and Constantine because in KVK 2, they are extremely good commanders. but once you get to Season of Conquest, their viability falls off completely. Constantine, the only thing he is used for is for Sunset Canyon and Lost Canyon. And the only reason why is because of his buffing ability. And you can see I do use Constantine. Most of the top players use Constantine, or they're using, Milan and Trajan. Usually they're using both. Like, for example, a lot of these guys have Trajan, Mulan, and Constantine in their lineups. And so Constantine is a really great commander for Sunset Canyon for giving you that extra value. However, he is not going to be good enough to use in the open field. He is a complete punching bag, very similar to Alexander the Great, just doesn't have the viability in the open field to be usable. However, I have used him extensively with Guan Yu, and I also have used him quite a bit with Herald, which was actually a pretty good combo for city popping as well, because both of them have active skills that can be shot off at any time. They both have instant proc damage. So in that way, Alexander the Great is actually pretty useful. But if you are only using him for the open field, he probably isn't good enough to not plan on replacing. So if you are able to, I would recommend you replace your Alexander the Great with a commander like Scipio, with a commander like Sargon, with Herald, with Tariq. All these commanders are much better options for your infantry and really should be your number one priority if you are looking at investing into your infantry. Now, when we're looking at the museum buffs, obviously these first generation commanders have two options with them. And so you have the first option that gives you a lesser amount of stats, and then the second option that costs a little bit more relics and a lot more coins to get that second option. And so eventually we will be seeing an upgrade for these second generation commanders, such as Genghis Khan, Saladin, Constantine, Alexander the Great, and Pyrrhus. All these commanders are going to get a second option for an upgrade. So for example, I would assume for Alexander the Great, we're going to see probably 15 or 20% infantry defense, and most likely a 5 or 6% normal attack damage reduction. Still not going to be good enough to use in the open field. And with Constantine, we'll probably see a 25 or 30% infantry attack, along with 7 to 10% normal attack damage. And once again, still not going to be good enough to use in the open field. If we take a look at Saladin and Genghis Khan, we can see for Saladin, you have 10% cavalry attack and 10% cav march speed, which is pretty decent. Really good for if you are hitting gathering marches in the open field, especially in KVK. This is going to be a really good commander you can use with your Belisarius for the extra march speed. And then with Genghis Khan, we have 10% cav defense and active skill damage factor plus 100, which is pretty decent, but still not good enough to use in the open field. So one downside of this museum system is that a majority of the commanders in here, and even with these museum relics, they still aren't good enough. And, some of them are much better. Like, for example, like I said, YSG, Minamoto, Mehmed, even Charles Martel are also really, really good with these relics. But like I said before, these newer generation commanders are just not going to be good enough to use in the open field, even with the museum. But like I said before, if you are already using Alexander the Great, this is an amazing buff for you because, you're already using him. So now you're just getting some extra value. Same with Saladin. I know some people that still use Saladin and now they're just getting that extra buff. So if you are using them, this is awesome. If you're not, they're not must-haves to have in the open field. If anything, they are the first commanders you're going to be replacing. If you guys enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about this new museum buff and if you are going to be using Constantine or Alexander the Great. Thanks for checking out the video. Have a good one.